Hey guys, it's Jay, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get significantly better video quality out of the Sony A7C and ZV-E10 cameras by using SLog2. So what is SLog2, you might wonder? SLog is a video recording profile that allows you to capture more dynamic range than the standard profile, but it does require a little bit of editing to get it to look its best. So when it comes off the camera, it looks really flat, as you can see here. The editing process for video is known as grading, and basically you're just adding contrast and saturation to the footage to make it look how it would normally look. So I'm going to be using manual exposure mode when recording video on these two cameras. So if you are not familiar with that, I would highly recommend first checking out my camera modes tutorials that I have linked below for each camera. Now, you might be apprehensive to start using SLog, and believe me, I was also for years, and only started using it about a year ago myself when I got the Sony A7C. So I totally understand where you're coming from, but listen, don't worry, because I'm going to show you how to set the cameras up and how to properly expose for SLog2. I will also show you how to get the most accurate colors by using custom white balance. I will then bring the SLog video footage into Final Cut, which is my editing software that I use, and I'll show you how to grade the footage. Plus, I'll show you how to create a preset so it's much easier to grade the footage next time you do it. It's like a great starting point. Alright, so what we're looking at is the ZV-E10 screen right here, and I actually have my ZV-E10 mounted on the overhead rig, aiming down at my desk, and that's what you're looking at right here. You're looking at my desk, and I have this gray card here. Now, to make this process super easy, you're going to want to pick up one of these gray cards. I got this one on Amazon for like $8. They're very affordable, but it makes this process super easy when using the gray card, as you'll see in a second. So highly recommend getting one of those. So let me just show you how I have the ZV-E10 set up. So for shoot mode here, I have it set to manual exposure, and I'm recording in 4K at 24p, 100 megabits per second. And sorry about the camera moving around, it's just because it's on this overhead rig. So let me go in here and show you where the picture profile is. It's right here. This is how you set the camera to SLog2. You go to picture profile, and you're going to want to select PP7, and then there's a little arrow. You can go over to the right, and that'll show you the gamma right here, and that's SLog2. The color mode I have set to sgamut3.cine. Now what we need to do is we need to set up, if I just hit the menu button, we need to turn the zebras on. So if we go in here, right here under zebra setting, page 7, zebra display level on, and I have it set to custom. So notice here you have a C1 option there. I'm actually going to go to the right, and you can go in there and select standard range. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set that to 32 for SLog2. That's where you want it. And then over here on the right, this by default is set to 5. I actually like to set that at ±2. It just makes it a little bit more accurate. So that's how you set the zebras up. And this is basically the tool that's going to allow you to check the exposure super easy. You'll see that in a second. Now notice when you have it on SLog2, the ISO. If I click the ISO button here, over on the dial, see how 400 is grayed out and 500 is the first usable ISO, let's say? That's because I'm in SLog2, so that is the base ISO, and that is what you're going to want to use when using SLog2. You can raise the ISO and go up higher, but I recommend trying to keep it at the base ISO if at all possible. You might have to use a faster lens, change your lighting or whatever, but you do want to try to keep your ISO at the base for the best quality possible. All right, let me go back in the menu. Now there is another setting here that you're going to want to turn on, and that's going to be in the setup page here, right here, Gamma Display Assist. I have that set to SLog right here. You can leave it on auto if you want. I'm just going to put it on auto actually. Leave it on auto, that's fine. Notice how I have the shutter speed set to 1/50th of a second. That is double the frame rate. So I'm recording in 24p, so I have the shutter double that, and the closest I can get is 1/50th of a second. Also notice we're at f4, that's the fastest this lens can go. This is the 16 to 70 millimeter f4 Zeiss zoom lens that I have mounted to the ZV-E10. So if I change my display mode here, I can actually bring up the histogram, which is right here. So that's what the histogram looks like when you're looking at this scene. So what we're looking for in the exposure is we should see zebras on that gray card and we're not seeing them. So that's because it's overexposed a little bit. So if we stop the aperture down by turning the aperture dial, you see how the zebras show up? So right there at f5, that is a proper exposure for this particular scene. And remember, I'm measuring this. This is my subject that I'm exposing for. So the gray card is my subject. So now if I were to put like a camera or something here, for example, that would be properly exposed. So now again, we have lighting here that I'm playing with. So if I turn another light on, because what I normally like to do when I have a product here is I like to have two light sources. So I like to have a light at the other side as well, like this one. And now you can see it just got a little bit brighter. So I could probably stop this down just a little bit more. No, it still looks like f5's good. So we're good there. Like the exposure is well within range, and this is basically how you would set it up. So what I want to show you now is how to get the most accurate colors possible. If you go to the menu here, go up to the top, white balance. All right, so we're going to go into white balance here. And I'm just going to go to custom 1. If you scroll down, you'll see the custom one there. And if you go to the right, you could then hit set. And when you hit set, it's going to bring up a little box like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit this capture button, which is the center button right here. So on the back of the camera, I'll hit that. It's going to take a photo. And now that is the custom white balance. Now the camera is configured to 5200 Kelvin. And I'm just going to apply that, click enter. And now we are good to go. So now we have the custom white balance set, and we're going to get the most accurate colors possible. So if I hit record, all right, so now I got it recording, and I'll show you what this color chart looks like. If I zoom it up here, and then if I hold this like it's a product or something, I can show you how this looks. You can see my skin tones, and that's pretty much it. That's how you set up the camera for SLog2. Alright guys, so here you can see I have my Sony A7C set up. So it's in my studio environment here, so I have the XLR unit on top with my mic, you know, going directly into the camera and all that stuff. But if you just look at the settings on the camera, you can see on the top I have it set to 4K 24p. I have the shutter at 1/50th of a second. The major difference on the A7C though is I'm using the 35mm f1.8 lens. So I have the aperture at f1.8 because I want the background to look nice and blurry. So because the aperture is so much larger, I also have to have an ND filter on the front of the lens. So I have a variable ND filter, and that's what this little handle is. So I can dial in basically the exposure using that ND filter. It makes it really easy to just get the exposure exactly right. Because remember, I want to leave the ISO at the base of 500. I do not want to change that. And I also do not want to change the shutter speed. The shutter speed, you want it to be double the frame rate. So now I have facial recognition turned on. And you can see all the way on the left there how I have PP7 selected, which is SLog2. And again, I have this gray chart. Now, if you look, you could see here, I'm exposing for my face. That's what matters, right? And you can see how I have the zebras set up, and it looks really good. Like, that's close. That's right where we want it. So we know the exposure is going to be good because we see those zebras at 32% on this gray card right where my face is. So I want my face to be exposed correctly. That's why I'm holding the chart there. And that's really all there is to it. Now, I could raise and lower the light power because I have a variable light. You know what I mean? So I could like lower the light power, for example, and that will affect my exposure. Like, see, I just lowered the light, so it's a little bit darker, but you can still see it's fairly close. And it'll still get you an accurate exposure. You just got to get it pretty darn close. And so right about there, right around 75%, seems to be pretty good. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. But then, of course, I can also dial it in using the ND filter. I can actually lower the ND filter and make the image much darker. If I drag this down, for example, you can see now the image is way underexposed. So what I could do now is I could raise the light power way up if I had to, but I don't want to do that. I have the light power high enough already, so I'm just going to lower the ND filter like so, somewhere right around there. So that's a little bit too bright, so I just got to dial in till I see it on the chart, right about there. Right about there looks about perfect. So there it is. So that's the A7C all set up. And let me hit record here. So now I'm recording with the A7C and I have it dialed in just like I showed you, same setup as the ZV-E10. The camera is basically set up exactly the same way. It's just the lens is different. So again, because of the faster aperture lens, I do have to put an ND filter on there to block some of the light. Because remember, the lens that I have for the overhead rig is an f4 lens. And I want the lighting set up for both cameras. So this way I can switch between the overhead rig and the main camera while I'm filming and talking at the same time. They can't be set up different or else it won't work, you know what I mean? So I have them set for the same exposure basically, so I can interchange while I'm filming. And that's pretty much how it works. All right, guys, let's go into Final Cut and I'll show you how I grade this footage. And I think you're going to be pretty surprised. It's actually quite easy to do as long as you get the exposure and colors correct. All right, so here we are in Final Cut, and I got the clips that we took a second ago here. So this is from the ZV-E10. So let me just drag this down into the timeline. And I'll scroll over. This is the actual project for the video that I'm making right now. So I'm just going to bring this. So here is the footage from the ZV-E10. So let me just bring it up. I'm going to put it right about here like so. All right, so this is how I like to grade video footage. Now, you could do it so many different ways, guys. There's tons and tons of videos on how to grade footage. You could also use what's called LUTs, which will basically just do all the grading for you. I don't like doing that. I like doing everything by hand myself. I just prefer to do things that way. But in any event, if you look up here on the right, you could see this little box here. If you're not seeing the windows on the right hand side, you got to hit this little box on the very top. And then if you click on this button here, this will be your colors. And if you select this little down arrow here, this is where you can change it from color board to color wheels to color curves and hue saturation curves. So I have it set to color wheels. That's what this is. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to display the video scopes. So if you go here to view, and you select video scopes here, that will bring up the video scopes. Now if I select this box, it'll hide the library on the left hand side. You see that? So it'll give us a little bit more screen real estate. So now you can see the waveform and it's got each channel. If you click up here, I like to use waveform and RGB parade. So you remember how I said we were going to want to add contrast and saturation. So here you could see the lack of contrast. Now 70, I have a line at 70. That's what you really normally want skin tones to be at. 100 is white and 0 is black. So what we're going to do is if we go over here to the color wheels, we can go to the highlights. And on the right hand side, this is how you adjust the brightness level up and down. On the left hand side is where you can adjust the saturation up and down for each given channel. And then global up here, it's just the whole image you're adjusting at once. But all I want to do is adjust the highlights and the shadows first. So I'm just going to drag up the highlights until I get that to approximately 100. And you can see right there the red channel is right about 100. So I'm going to put that right about there. Now the shadows, I'm going to drag that down to right about 0. Right about there. Looks pretty good. Now we can raise up the saturation a little bit by dragging the saturation up somewhere right about there. And that's about it. Like, that's a pretty good adjustment. Now, because I raised the saturation, you could see the exposure kind of adjust a little bit. So I could then bring the highlights down just a touch to make sure that that's not clipping. And now if we scroll through here, you can see the contrast and everything looks pretty darn good. And you can see here on the remote what that looks like as well. And you can see, again, the exposure, skin tones, everything is looking pretty darn good. Now, if you look here, it looks like we could maybe bring the blacks down just a little bit more, but I like the way this looks. And this is called like where the grading process is a matter of like feel. So you just have to put it to where you want it. Now, because what I'm filming right now is a black object, I do want it just a little bit brighter than I would normally. You could probably drag this down just a little bit more. You could see here, but now the black is just a little darker than I want. So it really depends on what you're filming and what you're recording. You know, a lot of times I'm holding cameras in my hands and I want it just a little bit brighter because I don't want it to be too dark black where you can't see the detail of the camera body, for example. So that's where dialing this in comes into play. So let me grab the clip from the A7C here, right here. All right, so let me drag this over. And here is the A7C footage that I took. What I want to show you is the same quick process here. And notice, because of the scene is being much different, the color chart looks a lot different as well. You can see here on the left, like it looks way different. So when we adjust this, you got to keep that in mind. So I'm going to bring the shadows down just a little bit. And I'm just looking at the overall scene, the look that I'm going for, somewhere right around there. You can see the red is clipping just a little bit, but that's okay. Somewhere right around there. And then the highlights, again, I'm kind of looking more for the skin tones. So I am going to let them just blow out just that little bit. Something right around there. And now midtones you can play with just to get a little bit more contrast. Saturation I could then raise up a little bit to get that skin color back. You can see how the color of my skin, somewhere right around there. So that's pretty much a pretty good exposure, I would say, for the A7C. Now, of course, we can also add sharpening and things like that to make this look even better, but I just wanted to show you the basic grading process. Check this out. So this is the ZV-E10, and if you go back to this little film icon here, if you click on that, you can see all the different effects I have. Now, I could also drag up other things. Like I was saying, I could bring sharpening in, I could adjust the hue saturation, I could add all sorts of like more layers basically over here. But for now, this is just a basic color grade. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna do Save Effect Preset. See this button right here? If you click that, this is gonna save whatever you have selected. So all I want is the color wheels for this example. So I'm just gonna call this ZV-E10, and then I'm gonna say overhead -rig. I'm gonna click save, and that's gonna save over here to my presets. So now if I click on this clip here, and I reset the effects, if I right click on effects and go to reset parameters, that's gonna put everything back to default. So you can see now the image here looks flat. So now if I go down here and I search for the ZV-E10, I just type in ZV, it'll come up. So right here is the one I just saved. So I can click and drag and just drop it right onto my clip. And now I have that clip just graded. It's already done. Now, of course, you can go in here and tweak the settings. So this is just a great starting point. So I can actually drag the shadows up just a little bit if the blacks are looking a little too black, or whatever the case may be. But that's how you use presets to get yourself going, you know, to get a nice baseline and get your grading process started. And again, if you don't change any of your settings, like in my studio here, you know, you can just use these presets and get your workflow done really quick. I really hope you got something out of this video, and if you found it useful, if you can give me a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. Also consider subscribing, that'd be great. And in addition to that, below the video in the description area, I have affiliate links, and I also have links to that gray chart card that I was showing you a minute ago, and some other stuff that I use, such as my camera gear and lighting and things like that. So if you guys want to check that out, that's down below in the description. All right, I will catch up with you later. Have a great day, and stay tuned for the next video, which I'm planning on being custom settings for the Sony A7 IV. So stay tuned for that. I will catch up with you next time. Take care.